we go again. Welcome, episode 19, another edition of Touchstones Music. This is my series on music and albums from the 60s, which I purchased around that time and which have been musical touchstones for me ever since. This episode, we feature the second album from a psychedelic prog rock group that would eventually morph into a hard rock icon, Deep Purple. From 1968, The Book of Taliesin. Let's hear a quick clip from that. This is a cover song of a Neil Diamond song called Kentucky Woman.
Kentucky woman, she shines in her own kind of light. She looks at you once in a day, what's wrong?
All right, starting off real snappy there. So for Deep Purple fans, this would be considered Deep Purple Mark I, because there were some personnel changes over the years. Mark I included Nick Simper on bass, Ian Pace on drums, Rod Evans on vocals, Richie Blackmore on guitar, and John Lord on keyboards. They started out wanting to be clones of the American psychedelic prog rock group Vanilla Fudge. Blackmore had already honed his guitar skills playing in various groups, including Screaming Lord Sutch. He had also done session work, like another of his contemporaries, Jimmy Page, who would later form Led Zeppelin. I believe they were the two sort of go-to guitarists. If you were doing recording and you wanted sort of modern rock guitar, you would get whichever one of those was available. In 1969, Deep Purple would tour for a while as the opening act with their heroes, Vanilla Fudge. I imagine that was quite a thrill for them. This was part of a tour to promote their new second album, Book of TALIESYN. Their first album, Shades of Deep Purple, had reached number 24 in America, which is very respectable considering that's a top 200. And the single Hush reached number 4. Now, this gave the band a lot of momentum in America. However, this was not mirrored in their home country of the UK, where critics and audiences largely ignored the band. They were very much an underground band there and were existing sort of on word of mouth and live performances. They were brought back to the studio to record their second album after only 3 months after completing Shades, and only 2 months before they were to begin an extended North American tour to promote the same album, which they haven't even recorded yet. Despite all those limitations, they were determined to make this album better than the first one. It's recorded between August and October 1968 at Delane Lee Studios in London, England. It didn't do as well in the U.S., not nearly as well on the Billboard Hot 200 or on the singles, but it didn't matter. The record company were right. This gave them just enough momentum, extra momentum, to keep their the demand for them growing. And that plus the tour that they started. Rod Evans' lyrics were inspired by the 14th century Welsh manuscript, the Book of Taliesin. The title and cover were also inspired by this manuscript. This album, like the first one, was a mix of original tunes by the band and cover tunes. The cover art was by a gentleman named John Vernon Lord, who was no relation, as it turned out, to John Lord. His assignment was to give the illustration a fantasy Arthurian touch with hand lettering. His main inspiration was this collection of 6th century Welsh poems by the bard Taliesin that was in this 14th century manuscript we just mentioned. And the record company felt this would resonate well with hippie record buyers, their target demographic, evidently, and it was a marketing ploy. I purchased the record around February of 1969. I guess that makes me one of their target demographic. Later that same spring, I caught them live at a local arena opening for Vanilla Fudge. I suspect I was one of the few people in the audience who actually knew who Deep Purple were. At that time, they weren't very well known in my area. Vanilla Fudge, on the other hand, was huge in that area, and that's what most people had come to see. By this time, both bands had tailored their stage acts and were as exciting to watch as to listen to. And as I recall, that was a great concert. So the vinyl, side one, you can see it's a mix of covers like Kentucky Woman and We Can Work It Out by Lennon McCartney and some originals by the band. Let's hear a clip from We Can Work It Out and see how Deep Purple handles a Beatles tune.
Try to sing it my way, so I have to keep on talking till I can't go on.
So you can hear Blackmore's guitar and Simper's bass all over that one. Side 2 of the vinyl, some more originals, and another cover at River Deep Mountain High, which Ike and Tina Turner in the U.S. had already made an R&B hit in the U.S. You will notice that one of the songwriters for River Deep Mountain High is Phil Spector. Yes, the famous Phil Spector, and his wall of sound recordings that made so many hit records in the early 60s. He was extremely famous producer at that time. Unfortunately, he later became infamous for something else, which was murder, and ended up in prison. As they say, is another story. So there's some soaring vocals, a clip from River Deep Mountain High. Deep Purple, of course, went on to become one of the premier hard rock groups of the 70s and became one of the faces of hard rock, in fact. That was, of course, the so-called Mark II version of the band, because singer Rod Evans and bassist Nick Simper were replaced after the group recorded another studio album, a record now known as Deep Purple 3. Before making their first hard rock album, titled Deep Purple and Rock, a very good record, by the way, which I recommend you look up, they recorded a concert called Concerto for Group and Orchestra, written by John Lord and presented live at the Royal Albert Hall in London, England, with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra and the band. The concert included their new singer, Ian Gillan, and their new bassist, Roger Glover. Ian Gillan was already famous because there had been a record called Jesus Christ Superstar that was before the movie, and he had sung the lead on the record. Book of Taliesin introduced me to Deep Purple, and I have been a fan ever since. I purchased the album on the strength of the radio single Kentucky Woman. As a fan of electric guitar, I was, and still am, impressed by Blackmore's fluid playing on that track. If you don't believe me, just listen to the lead guitar break in that song, and I think you'll be impressed. This album has been another one of my touchstones since I purchased it, and I hope it will also be one for other music fans. Well, that's all for this edition. As always, until next time, be well, and thanks for joining me.